always heard about that, but I never really gave it much thought. Didn't take it much seriously. There was plenty of meat at Unity Inn when I was there. But after the intro that Nina and Lisa did just a couple weeks ago on this world peace diet, I know differently. I got a 2-page handout from them of quotes from Charles Fillmore on the subject. And this was just a small sample of his teachings on this subject. Now, why do I ask? Did I never learn about this in seminary? Why don't they talk about this anymore? You got to read the book to understand. But I think one of the reasons is because of our emphasis in true teaching and unity on the law of mind action. Right? Thoughts held in mind produce after their time. I always believe in unity that it is just our thoughts that matter, and nothing that we put into our bodies can harm us or can harm others. And listen to this quote from Charles. That is in good company. When I began the study of truth, this is from Charles Fillmore, when I began the study of truth, I was told that it made no difference what I ate if I was in the right thought. This seemed to prove true up to a certain point in my experience. Me too.
Me too.
While my spiritual development was confined to the conscious mind, there seemed no special need of food discrimination. But gradually, now listen here, this is what he writes, but gradually a new phase set in. This is the new phase, folks. This is the new age, the new consciousness we're always talking about. The time has come to elevate ourselves to a new way of living, a new way of being in this world. If you're still saying, well, that's fine for your spiritual development, BJ, but not for me, let me try to suggest some possible good reasons for you to join me on this vegan vessel. In answering the question, what does this have to do with you? What does this have to do with you? I don't want you to be going in the ambulance like I was at the end of last year. So going back to the teaching, what you sow, so shall you reap, which is the law of cause and effect. It's a universal law. Let me read from Will's book again, page 48. The countless ways the chickens come home to roost. Forcing horror on animals. We find horror in the mass media and in popular entertainment increasing.
Yes.
As we kill young animals for food, we find child and teen and suicide skyrocketing. As we purposefully enrage animals, as in rodeos, we find our own rage increasing. As we purposefully induce fear in them, as in laboratory experiments on fear, we find our own chronic fear increasing. As we force osteoporosis on them by pushing them to overproduce milk and eggs, we find ourselves suffering an epidemic of osteoporosis. As we intentionally overfeed them to create the swollen and diseased duck and goose livers we eat, we find ourselves chronically overeating foods with toxic residues and thereby damaging our livers and other internal organs. As we force animals to be fat, diseased, overcrowded, anxious, and stressed, we become the same. As we feed them unnaturally processed, chemical-laden food, we find our grocery stores filled with similar toxic products posing as foods. As we confine them to little boxes, we find ourselves confined in office cubicles of our own making. As we ignore animal suffering, we ignore each other's suffering. As we deny animals their dignity and privacy, we deny our own dignity and find our privacy being increasingly eroded. As we enforce powerlessness on them, we feel increasingly powerless. As we reduce them to mere commodities, we become mere commodities ourselves. And as we destroy their ability to fulfill their purpose, we lose track of our purpose. As we deny them rights, we lose our own rights. As we enslave them, we become slaves ourselves. As we break their spirits, our own spirits are broken. As we sow, we reap. And he gives an example of this. The cardiac units of metropolitan hospitals have become assembly lines for heart bypass surgeries. Scores of people go through every day, one after another, to have these expensive and radical operations performed. They are typically people who have eaten many animals. Meanwhile, animals are lined up in slaughterhouse assembly lines and stabbed, one after the other. People eat them and line up in hospitals to be stabbed, one after the other. As we stab, so shall we be stabbed. Yeah! Okay, I'm getting it. Folks, this issue, affects you directly. It affects me directly. Let me give you another quote from Charles Fillmore. I want to give you a warning on this quote. And did Rowan leave? Good. Is he out of the room? Oh, he's here. This is PG-17. I don't know how much violence he can hear. It's your decision as parents. I've been pretty gentle. You're probably going, what? This is Charles writing, okay? And remember me telling you in the past that the job of a good clergy person is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable? Or to quote Emerson, he says, people wish to be settled. Only as far as they're unsettled is there any hope for them. So be ready to be unsettled. Be ready to be afflicted a little bit. So here we go. I'm going to read the quote. Again, it is proven by experiment that certain negative states of consciousness peculiar to the animal accompany its flesh in all its journeys through the body of man. All the upbuilding life goes out with the soul of the animal when it gives up its body. But the fears, the violence, the ignorance, the anger, the lust, and all that pertains to the error side of consciousness hover around the dead cells. In San Francisco, a number of years ago, many people were made violently ill from eating meat bought at a certain shop. Physicians investigated and they found that the carcass of a certain deer was the source, and it was presumed that it was diseased. But further inquiry developed this to be an error. The animal was unusually healthy and vigorous. In fact, so vigorous and forceful that he fought for his life for over an hour after the attempt to kill him began. He was in a frenzy of terror and anger. His eyes were bloodshot and he frothed at the mouth while the butchers were trying to slay him. The physicians decided that the anger and terror of the steer poisoned his meat in a manner similar to that of the angry mother who made of milk, which is well known to make the infant sick. This instance was but an exaggeration of conditions that exist in milder form in all animal flesh offered for food in our markets. Before they are slain, these poor brutes are maltreated in ways almost beyond imagination or enumeration. Visit shipping pens, stock trains, stockyards, and packing houses if you want evidence of the suffering of the poor beasts of the field. And these very sufferings are through the law of sympathetic mental vibrations transferred to the flesh of those who eat the bodies of these animals. The undefined fears, the terrors of the nightmare, and the many disturbances in stomach and bowels that man endures may be in a measure traced to these unsuspected sources. This affects you. You're depressed lately, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're stressed, you're obese. What are your issues? Look at your plate. So I hope I've convinced you now of the importance of this to your well-being in body, mind, and spirit. But what of that last question? What does this have to do with Father's Day? What a quote will one last time. There's probably